Yo, what's up, man? Today is Friday, May 23rd, 2025. Welcome to the podcast with Soul. My name is Sean G. I run this channel. I want to welcome all of my new subscribers, all of my new female subscribers, all of my dude subscribers. I appreciate y'all for coming. And today we're going to talk about, I've been covering the Puffy trial. I live in North Jersey. I get up every morning and I go into Manhattan to the Southern District of New York Federal Court down in Chinatown. And I have been going to the court every day since Cassie testified, and I haven't missed a day. But one particular day struck me, and it was May the 24th. So today's the 27th. So today's Friday. So this would have been Tuesday. On Tuesday, a expert witness, a forensic psychologist, her name is Dawn Hughes, PhD. She testified as an expert witness for the prosecution. This is the case of the United States of America versus Sean Combs. Here's the indictment. It's a 14-page indictment. Count 1 is racketeering conspiracy. Count 2 is trafficking. And count 3 is selling of you know what. Now, I want to say this right up front, right off the bat. Let's lay the groundwork. Let's get down to it. I watched my mother get beat up by my father. Very vicious beatings, black eyes, blood on the floor, knots on the head, the whole thing. This is my real life. I actually saw domestic violence really go down. This is in the 1970s when I was growing up. And so I just want to let the ladies know that I do not condone domestic violence, that I am not insensitive to it. Any woman out there currently involved in a domestic violence situation or has been involved in a domestic violence situation or maybe one day will be involved in a domestic violence situation with a partner, a significant other, I don't condone that and I don't agree or approve of that. Now, let's get down to business. So, on May 24th, it was 10:41 in the morning. Dawn Hughes, PhD, took the stand, and these are my notes. I take excellent notes. I'm probably the best note taker ever in the existence of the planet Earth. So I've been in the courtroom every day taking notes. When Dawn got on the stand, she began the prosecutor, it might have been Steiner, who direct examined her, right? So the prosecution goes first. This is the prosecution's witness. They do a direct examination. And what they did with Dawn is they allowed her to qualify and state her background, her experience, and all of that. And she did that. She got a BS degree from Hamilton College in New York. She has an MS and a PhD from Nova Southeastern University down in Florida. She did some psychology work at the Yale School of Medicine, and she did some postdoctoral work at Cornell Medical College. Now, what she did was she went through, she was under direct examination for about 20 minutes, right? Just going through her experience. She is a forensic and clinical psychologist. Forensic meaning that she does a lot of work as an expert witness in the courts, and then she has a clinical practice where she meets with patients and clients in the real world and try to help them get through anxiety disorders, traumas related to domestic violence and abuse. And she went through all of that. She also talked about how she's the outgoing president of the American Psychological Association. She has 30 years experience in traumatic stress, and she's seen over thousands of victims, okay? She's licensed to practice in New York, New Jersey, North Carolina, Connecticut, and Virginia. The Southern District of New York, which is where the Puffy case is being heard, and the Eastern District of New York, which is in Brooklyn. She has appeared in court over 60 times. She's an expert in criminal and forensic psychology. She deals with domestic violence and other patterns of behavior related to that. Her hourly rate is $600 per hour or $6,000 for the day. They went through what are the reasons why victims remain in relationships when they're subject to domestic violence. She cited some research done over 40 to 50 years that there are different types of reasons. Abusive behaviors are psychological, emotional, financial, and physical. The love, the attention, companionship, and sometimes the victim has a bond or an attachment to the abuser. These are psychological consequences and disorders. She talked about how victims may also fear for their lives, and this is another reason why they may not leave abusive relationships. And I make the best coffee in the world. Victims can have feelings of depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and fear. And then another thing that was interesting, she said that the fear level can be from the lowest stage, which is anxiety, to the highest stage is where you fear for your actual existence. She went on to talk about how domestic violence, the physical part of domestic violence, doesn't have to be used every time, right? That all that has to happen is that the abuser just has to physically assault the victim one time, and that lays the groundwork and the template for the abuser to continue to control the victim, because now it's planted in the victim's mind that the abuser is willing to go there. They're willing to take it that far. And so it's not necessary to be victimized and be abused every single time. She talked about the different psychological abuse, but the defense jumped up and objected, and the judge sustained the defense's objection, which is Puffy's lawyer, and he struck that from the record. And he told the jurors, you should ignore the last statement made by the expert witness. Now, what she was talking about was the psychological abuse, the physical abuse, the threats, the intimidation, and walking on eggshells. There's emotional abuse. The abuser demeans the victim. The victim develops low self-esteem, depression, low self-perception, and refuses to talk about it, and it keeps them stuck in that situation. Dr. Hughes went on to talk about the financial dependence that the victim has for the abuser. Usually the abuser, according to Dr. Hughes, controls the housing, controls the finances, the transportation, the food, the groceries, and that keeps the victim locked into this situation because their very need for the necessities of life is dependent upon the abuser who's abusing them. Now, while she was saying that, Dr. Hughes, Dawn Hughes, in her testimony, she kept using the synonym, or the whatever the word you call it, the pronoun her. She doesn't have resources to leave. Her abuser controls her. She feels trapped. And the defense objected because, let me keep it going. The defense objected, and the judge sustained the objection and struck it from the record. That, this is little Sean calling me. Hold on, y'all. We'll deal with that later. The judge struck it from the record and advised the jury that you are to disregard the last statement you heard from the expert witness when she's referring, as she's giving her expert witness background and her credentials, she keeps using the word her. And obviously, this is about a female talking about Cassie Ventura in the Puffy trial. So they struck that from the record. Now, what was crazy about this is as I'm sitting there listening to her talk about her experience and background, y'all, I couldn't help but for notice that everything that Dawn Hughes was saying on the stand was describing Cassie's testimony and the direct examination of Cassie by the federal prosecutors to a T. She was describing it to a T, as if like she knew what to get up there and say. Now I need y'all to stay with me. Fasten your seatbelt. This is Dawn Hughes, PhD. Dawn Hughes is a clinical and forensic psychologist in New York City who specializes in the assessment and treatment of interpersonal violence, traumatic stress, and anxiety disorders. Dawn Hughes was raised in New York City. She received a Bachelor's of Arts degree at Hamilton College in upstate New York, where she majored in psychology. Already interested in the intersection between law and psychology, her senior field took her inside the state psychiatric prison facility. Upon graduating from college, Dawn Hughes got a psychology degree, went to work in the South Bronx. And then she talks about all this other stuff. And her professional affiliations is the American Psychological Association, New York State Psychological Association, and a bunch of other organizations. Now, Dr. Hughes completed her pre-doctoral internship at Yale University School of Medicine in the Department of Psychiatry. Her two rotations were at the Yale Substance Abuse Treatment Unit and West Haven Mental Health Center. She's got her ABPP diploma. This is just basically talking about all of her professional background, and you can download this yourself. She went on to talk about during an abusive relationship, there's something known as the honeymoon stage, where the abuser continues to abuse the victim, but shows love to them at the same time, right? Causing psychological confusion and a psychological attachment or a desire to continue to stay with the abuser. And she called this the trauma bond, right? That the victim leaves but is always willing to go back. The victim feels hopeless, or the victim is unable to leave. In all three of these scenarios were present in Cassie's testimony, right? So this is the thing. Let's keep going. Then she talked about love bombing, right? Love, love, bombing, bombing, where when the victim gets fed up and tired and ready to leave, the abuser will show love to them, giving them gifts, giving them money, taking them on trips, buying them things, once again to confuse the victim and to get the victim to stay in the relationship. Victims often remain in domestic violence relationships because of love, companionship. The abuser stalks them or harasses them. Coping mechanisms, passive self-defense. The victim can block punches, curl up in a corner to get the abuser to stop, or they can use active self-defense. They can punch back, yell back, right? Avoidance is another coping mechanism. They don't want to deal with it. They don't want to think about it. They don't want to talk about it. Minimization is another coping mechanism. The abuser's not that bad. They had a bad day at work, and that's why they hit me. They were drunk, and that's why they did what they did. That's minimizing. Disassociation. They zone out, they space out, and just try to forget everything. And this has the ability to impair the memory on the brain. The last coping mechanism that she talked about was drugs and alcohol. And then she threw this last point in. Check this out. Victims can still be positive and love the abuser while coping even years after the relationship was over. And I've already covered the fact that when Cassie took the stand, she continually reiterated her love for Puff. And that even to this day, when she was on the stand, that she loved their past, right? And in all the text messages that both the prosecution and the defense put up as it related to Cassie and Puff continually told each other they loved each other. They text from morning to night. Now, she said that victims can wait years to disclose the fact that they're being abused, right? And the reason they delay telling people about their abuse is because they fear of being judged, they fear the shame, they fear the economic and financial repercussions from the abuser if they find out. There's a delayed disclosure, and that victims can wait months or years to disclose, and that if they disclose, that friends that them and the abuser shared would leave them and disassociate themselves with their friendship, and it would leave them by themselves. They said that victims are more willing and ready to share their abuse and their pain with a stranger than they would with family, especially if the abuser is a family member. They said that the victims usually disclose their abuse when they're in a safe environment and they feel protected. They're likely to disclose their abuse to a trusted friend, mother, sister, or best friend. This happens over time. They give it out in piecemeal. They don't want to talk about the details because of shame, and they usually don't tell the name of the abuser. The impact of domestic violence and trauma on memory is that you forget details and you lose the ability to recall, and you can't really be too sure about the details. Dr. Hughes talked about the more that a victim is abused, this affects the memory and recall significantly. And that victims usually can recall and remember things that happened around a marker date, M-A-R-K-E-R, a birthday, a wedding, a cookout, Thanksgiving, Christmas. Like these days they can remember, like, yo, on Christmas, this went down. Then back over here on his birth, you know what I'm saying? On the birthday. So that was her testimony. And now it was time for Puffy's defense to come to the plate. Puffy, his lawyers, I don't know how many he's got, 6, 7, maybe 8. They are no joke. And this dude, man, this dude came up. His name is Jonathan P. Bach. Where my man Bio at? Let me show y'all my man. This is my man right here. Jonathan P. Bach. He's admitted to the bars in New York and the District of Columbia. He was educated. He got his law degree at Yale in 1990, went to Yale Graduate School, and he got his bachelor's degree from Yale. Jonathan Bach is one of the nation's leading trial lawyers. Over the past 30 years, he has handled numerous high-profile criminal and civil trials in federal and state courts throughout the country. He has successfully represented prominent Wall Street professionals, public officials, entertainment figures, as well as a range of public, private, and nonprofit entities. A past president of the New York Council of Defense Lawyers, his practice focuses on white-collar criminal defense and complex business litigation, including high-stakes trade secrets and other bet-the-company disputes. A fellow of the American College of Trial Lawyers and ranked among Law Dragon's 500 leading litigators in America, Jonathan has been long recognized in Chambers USA Best Lawyers in America, Euro Money Guide to the World's Leading White-Collar Criminal Lawyers, Legal 500 US, Benchmark Litigation, and New York Super Lawyers. In his criminal defense practice, Jonathan has obtained numerous trial acquittals and helped many individuals and entities avoid charges altogether. This dude, Jonathan Bach, came up and destroyed this forensic psychologist, man. It was such a beautiful thing to see and to hear. It was fascinating, the way that he was able to just like pick this girl apart, man. Hold on a second, I gotta read y'all something else about this clinical psychologist. Hold on. Okay, this is going back to Dawn Hughes. This is her bio. She was hired as a legal assistant for the federal defenders of the Southern District of New York, where she had the opportunity to research and argue psychological matters relative to sentencing in front of federal court judges. It was at that point that Dr. Hughes decided to pursue a more advanced study of psychology. So she, in her bio, on her page, exposes and expresses that she has been hired by the Southern District of New York, which is the exact court that Puffy's case is being tried in. Cross-examination. Jonathan Bach. He came out and he established from the door that every domestic violence case is individual. Every abuser is individual. Every victim is individual. No situation is homogeneous throughout, meaning the same. There's different dynamics, different circumstances, different ingredients to every situation, okay? He's established that from the door. He says, Dr. Hughes, there's individuality in every victim, right? She said, yeah. He says, you can't diagnose somebody until you heard what they have to say, right? She says, correct. And what he was alluding to was that in your clinical practice, you get to sit down with your clients, with the victims, and they sit in the chair and you sit here and you guys talk and you get to hear what they're saying. And this gives you the chance to diagnose what may or may not be going on with the victim. But in a forensic situation, as an expert witness, I don't think, and I need my lawyers to go in the comment section and clear this up, I don't think she would be allowed or was allowed to speak directly with Cassie, right? To diagnose what is going on with Cassie. And this is what Jonathan Bach is alluding to. So he's laying the groundwork and the jury is sitting there. He says, everyone doesn't fit into a box. Dr. Hughes, do you agree? She agreed, yes. He said, quote unquote, each person has something to say. She said, yeah. And you can see Dr. Hughes just like, poof, just like get deflated, right? He says, when you're speaking to a victim, you're listening carefully, right? You're paying attention to detail, right? She says, yes. And he says, you never spoke with Cassie, right? She says, no. Then he went into the difference between forensic and clinical. Forensic psychology, you go to other sources for info, courts, judges, and a jury. You listen to what the person has to say. And that the victim will have certain motivations, so you have to cross-check and do a deeper dive and be more skeptical of the victim, especially if it's for a civil trial. Now, Cassie's civil suit has been up on the internet for months now, right? So she probably had access to that, right? But Cassie's civil suit got settled for $20 million. Puffy settled it after she filed it in federal court. So Dr. Hughes very well may have went and read that document, right? But what Jonathan Bach is laying the groundwork to is that when you file a civil suit for $20 million, your motivation is to get $20 million, and you'll say anything, right? And you're motivated to say what's necessary in order to get the money. And Jonathan Bach brought up a key word called malingering. Malingering, right? And malingering, right? We got our research done. Malingering is the intentional fabrication or exaggeration of physical or psychological symptoms for personal gain. It's an action, and that action may need clinical attention or support, but it's not a diagnosis. Causes of malingering. To determine that somebody is malingering, Dr. Albers explains that a healthcare provider has to identify the personal gain that's motivating the behavior. And one of the bullet points is winning a civil or criminal court case. Malingering. He brings that up, malingering, to Dr. Hughes on the stand. She acknowledges. Jonathan Bach gets back on his cross-examination of Dr. Hughes, and he talks about comprehensive forensic evaluation, meaning in your practice, you give the patient tests. You give a personality assessment test, and you do a TSI, a trauma system inventory. Dr. Hughes says yes to all of this. He says you must do multiple evaluations, right? You have to talk to the individual. She said yes. He says, are you familiar with malingering? She agreed, yeah. Exaggerating and distorting the facts. Fabricating facts and responses. This is what Dr. Hughes said back to him. Malingering is fabricating facts and responses. And then there's a validity scale. And under the validity scale, some of the bullet points are, some people try to fool the tests. There's a response style, there's exaggeration, avoidance, and minimization. Then Jonathan Bach went for the jugular vein. He went for it. He went to destroy. He says, Dr. Hughes, you have given the same testimony today that you have always given in every federal court case that you're called to be an expert witness. He says, Dr. Hughes, you were hired by this prosecution's office, these very people these prosecutors that are prosecuting Puffy. You're hired by them for $600 an hour or $6,000 a day. He says, Dr. Hughes, you have always been hired by these prosecutors. You have given this same testimony before in this same courtroom. He says, Dr. Hughes, you haven't read any info on this case. He was either asking her that or telling her that. Like, you haven't read any info on this case? There is no fact I can give you? Right? Then he went on to say, I can tell you about Cassie, and all you can tell me about is your experience. Because I don't think, as an expert witness for the prosecution, that she would be allowed to read anything by Cassie. I'm not sure. Jonathan P. Bach, you haven't spoke with one witness in this case, right, Dr. Hughes? She said, no. He said, people go to civil lawyers to win lawsuits for different reasons, right? She said, yes. And she's just getting crushed on the stand. You can see her body language, everything changed. And she's getting frustrated. Jonathan Bach, Dr. Hughes, people can have new memories when money is involved, right? People's memory can be related to prevarication, right? Now, to prevaricate, the word prevaricate, Prevaricate, it means to stray away from the truth or just lie. Prevaricate. He says, Dr. Hughes, people's memory can be related to prevarication, right? He says, that's not bioneurology of the brain. Dr. Hughes, you have been retained many times as an expert witness. She says, yes. And he says, in fact, Dr. Hughes, you train other forensic and clinical psychologists like yourself to testify in court. You, Dr. Hughes, prepare and train other clinical and forensic psychologists how to prepare for court, how to respond to objections, how to respond to questions. how to know your jury, how to know the judge if it's a bench trial, right? How to conduct yourself on the stand, how to navigate through direct and cross-examination, how to get prepared, advanced preparation. He says, you teach this kind of course. He says, let me direct your attention to May 2015 to a webinar entitled Expert Witness Testimony. This was May 2015. He says, Dr. Hughes, are you familiar with this webinar? She says, who did that? He said, you. You did this. You gave this webinar presentation to other clinical and forensic psychologists, and the webinar was organized, was funded by an organization of the Department of Justice. The very people that are prosecuting Puffy. Right? Now, this is where it got crazy to me. He said, Dr. Hughes, today, meaning May 21st, 2025, most of your income is from court-related work, being an expert witness on the forensic psychology side. She says, that's not true. He says, are you sure that the majority of your income doesn't come from your clinical practice, that it comes from your forensic practice and dealing with the courts? She says, that's not true. He says, 60% of your revenue comes from your forensic practice, being an expert witness in court, in this court, the Southern District of New York, and the Eastern District of New York and Brooklyn, and only 40% comes from your private practice as a clinical psychologist. She says, that's not majority. He says it's greater than 50%. See, all you need for majority is for it to be 51%. One side has 51%, the other side has 49%. This side holds the majority. So those are two lies that she's caught in on the stand. He says, Dr. Hughes, in the 1900s, she began her practice in 1998. He says, in the 1900s, while you were matriculating through school and becoming a psychologist, you wrote articles, published articles. He said, however, since you have been, the majority of your revenue is coming from your forensic court expert witness side for this court, you're paid by this court. In the last 25 years, you haven't published anything. He says, you told us about your background, that you're on the faculty at Cornell. He said, but that's not a tenured position, right? You're a volunteer faculty. You just have that up there to boost up your bio. She's getting visibly frustrated on the stand, destroyed. Jonathan Bach. Dr. Hughes, in 27 years, you have never come into this court, the Southern District of New York, or the Eastern District of New York, and defended a man accused of a sex crime. Yet you claim yourself an expert in physical abuse and domestic violence. You have always represented the victim. Her response was, I don't evaluate offenders. How can you be an expert and you only focus on one side of the transaction? This is where it gets good. Jonathan Bach to Dr. Hughes. He says, you've had a number of meetings with federal prosecutors before your testimony here today, before you were called to testify today. She says, yeah, but she don't really want to admit it. He says, and in those meetings, You go over questions and testimony with the prosecutors, correct? She said, yes. Jonathan Bach, some of those meetings were in person with these very prosecutors prosecuting Puff. She said, yes. You've done video calls with these very prosecutors that are prosecuting Puff. She said, yes. Some of these meetings were more than 1 hour long with these prosecutors that are prosecuting Puff, right? She said, yes. You've sent emails to these prosecutors that are prosecuting Puff, right? He says, you've met with them 6 times before you testified here today. And he says, you don't know the facts of this case? She's getting visibly upset now. Jonathan Bach, what facts did the prosecutors tell you about this case? Jonathan Bach, Dr. Hughes, isn't it true that you met with the federal prosecutors right here prosecuting Puff after Puffy's defense team gave their opening statement? After Puffy, Mark Agnifilo, Terry Gallegos, and all of us gave our opening statement, the defense, pretty much laying out our strategy, our plan of attack, you as an expert witness who's supposed to be a blind witness went and met with the prosecutors after we gave our opening statement. She's just, you could see her face. She's struck, she's shook. Dr. Hughes, isn't it true that you also, again, this is the 8th time you met with prosecutors, after Cassie testified on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, you met with prosecutors again after that. Isn't that true? Once Jonathan Bach said that, the prosecution stood up and said, sidebar, time out, time, sidebar. Everybody in the court, I was in room 24B, all the reporters, all of the other people, the public, started laughing at this lady and just like giving Jonathan Bach his props, man. So they come back from the sidebar. Jonathan Bach to Dr. Hughes. What's her name? Hold on. Dawn Hughes. Jonathan Bach to Dr. Dawn Hughes. What topics did you discuss with the government when you met with them? Her response, I was helping them with their case. Dawn Hughes, PhD, who's supposed to be a blind witness, impartial, objective, testified on the stand under oath that after the defense did its opening statement, she met with the prosecutors. After Cassie gave her 3 days of testimony, she met with the prosecutors to help them with their case. Jonathan Bach, in an incredulous voice, what? You helped them with it? You helped, you're a psychologist, and you helped the prosecutors write briefs. You helped these elite level, professional, expert level lawyers, legal minds with their case. Everybody is hearing this. The jury is hearing this. Then he come back, and you mean to tell me you know nothing about the facts and you needed 6 to 8 meetings to educate these lawyers about the case? You needed to meet with them 6 to 8 times to educate them about their case that they are prosecuting, and you're a psychologist? Yo, he destroyed her, man. Dr. Hughes, this is Jonathan Bach. Isn't it true that the government shared drafts of your testimony before the trial? Dr. Hughes, isn't it true the help you were giving the federal prosecutors, you were emailing prosecutors for briefs with language? Oh, put this in, take this out, put this part in. Dr. Hughes, you were doing that to advocate for the prosecution. Dr. Hughes, you were getting paid by the Department of Justice, the same people that pay these prosecutors their paycheck. Dr. Hughes, you met with the federal prosecutors again. Dr. Hughes, you knew you would be a witness in this case. Dr. Hughes, you are here to be a blind witness. Sidebar, 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 another sidebar. Jonathan Bach comes back after they come back from the sidebar. He looks at her and he says, Dr. Hughes, you are here and you were supposed to be a blind witness. I have no more questions. He sits down. The government gets up. The prosecutors get up. They do a redirect. Ain't nothing really, there's really no spice to it. There's no meat on the bone. They just trying to undo what Jonathan Bach just did to her, but ain't nothing happening. But the prosecutor that gets up to do the redirect says this out loud in court. Dr. Hughes, have you ever been retained by any one of the lawyers on Puffy's defense team? She says, have you been retained by a defense attorney that is in the courtroom today? And Dr. Hughes says, yes, I have. And who she was referring to was Brian Steele. The prosecutor said that. Have you been retained by a defense attorney also that is in this courtroom today? Dr. Dawn Hughes said yes. The prosecutor says, I have no more questions, thinking she got one off on Puffy's defense team. Jonathan Bach got right back up. He says, Dr. Hughes, the prosecutor just alluded to and highlighted the fact that you were retained by one of the attorneys in the courtroom today. He says, Jonathan Bach, Dr. Hughes, you worked with Mr. Steele, right? She said yes. She says, the case that you worked on with Mr. Steele, that woman was a victim of domestic violence, right? Dr. Hughes said yes. Dr. Hughes, that woman shot her husband in the head 5 times as a result of domestic violence, right? Dr. Hughes said yes. Jonathan Bach, Dr. Hughes, isn't it true that Mr. Steele decided not to retain you after meeting you? She said, yeah, that's true. Another government lie, because the prosecutor got up and said that one of the lawyers retained her. She was never retained. They maybe had an interview and they were gonna retain her, but after Richard Steele met her, he decided not to retain her. And then Jonathan Bach said this, Dr. Hughes, isn't it true that nothing stopped you from reading the trial transcripts and witness testimony and witness statements from this trial? And he said, I have no more questions. Now, this is what I want to talk about now. I went and looked it up. And what I typed into Google was, can an expert witness meet with the prosecutor in a federal case? The answer is yes. An expert witness can meet with the prosecutor in a federal case, but it's crucial to understand the ethical and legal implications. The prosecutor can meet with the expert witness to discuss the case and gather information, but they must disclose all communications with and documents shared with the expert to the opposing counsel. The expert's role: they are not an advocate for the prosecution or an advocate for the defense. They are supposed to be a blind witness. I then went and researched what is prosecutorial misconduct in federal court. Misconduct by the prosecutors, prosecutorial misconduct. In the context of federal court, prosecutorial misconduct refers to a prosecutor's actions or omissions that violate the law, ethical standards, or a defendant's constitutional rights. Prosecutors have a duty to act fairly and must adhere to ethical guidelines. Unfair treatment. Misconduct can deprive a defendant of a fair trial and potentially lead to wrongful convictions. Misconduct by prosecutors can erode public trust in the justice system and tarnish the credibility of the criminal justice process. Peace.